I love my dogs. They are my best friends and one of the few things that I can count on as I navigate these choppy waters that we call life. There is nothing that my wife and I wouldn't do for them, including spending thousands of dollars to remove a cancerous cyst from Lindsay, or to have Haley hospitalized and monitored when she ate a bottle of Excedrin that our former roommate left in her reach. These are our dogs, and they are counting on us to take care of them as best as we can. But they aren't our only dogs. They aren't the only ones that depend on us for their well-being, for their very survival. As Wisconsinites, it is also our responsibility to care for the dogs that we've left outside, the Wisconsin wolf, and we are failing them.
Everyone's got dogs. Almost everyone has a dog. They love their dogs. And they spend tons of money on little outfits for their dogs, fancy treats, take them to the vets if they just scratch themselves. But yet, for some reason, this wolf hunt seems to be acceptable. And I don't get it, because they are our #1 dog. That's where all dogs came from.
Our team spent a week up in northern Wisconsin to get the facts on the wolf hunt. We knew that those in power, the ones making the decisions regarding the management of wolves, wouldn't take us seriously if we only talked to people in our native Dane County. The policymakers on this issue are as dismissive as they are uninformed, and we thought that the only way we'd have a ghost of a chance to get them to pay attention to us would be to show them that it's not just all the hippie liberals in the capital city that are against the hunt, but also the rural citizens of our great state. We interviewed people from all walks of life, including farmers, scientists, and prominent members of the native tribes, most of them also hunters, to try and get a complete picture of how this trophy hunt is hurting the ecology and the economy of Wisconsin.
I see the recent wolf hunt that's moved in the last few years. I was pretty disheartened to see that, because wolves are actually getting up to a sustainable population. I thought it was something that was actually going to be held into the future, with over 1,000 animals coming into the state. And I was pretty disappointed to see that there have been planned wolf hunting here in Wisconsin, because I saw that their numbers are actually getting up, or they could help control some of the diseases that we've been seeing coming into the deer herd, like chronic wasting disease and bovine encephalitis, and some of the tuberculosis in the deer. And obviously the wolf have a role and a niche in nature, an ecological niche, to help keep the deer that are weak and sick and old, take them out of the deer herd. And I thought that chronically wasted deer and other types of deer that have diseases would benefit from having a predator like the wolves around.
It's not a coincidence that some of the major diseases affecting deer, chronic wasting disease, we have EHD, we have bovine tuberculosis in Michigan. Some of these diseases are appearing, or all the diseases are appearing in areas where we have few or no wolves. And I think people need to see the positive aspects of wolves.
Most people don't know that wolves have a very valuable part to play in the ecosystem. And we have, where we live, a lot of deer. And the deer come in and they eat everything in your garden, including your tomatoes. They eat your shrubs and your flowers. And just to keep the deer population under control in our area, wolves are very valuable. In places like Yellowstone, where the wolf population was depleted, the elk came in and ate all the vegetation on the sides of the streams, and it reduced the fish and the birds, and it has an effect on the whole ecosystem that just, one thing after another. When they brought them back, the fish returned, the birds returned, the saplings returned to the sides of the streams.
The Yellowstone example shows improve the health of the ecosystem. They keep the deer moving so they don't overgraze, and so they can form a very important role in our whole natural environment in Wisconsin.
With all of the evidence pointing toward our need to have wolves in the state, how could something like a public wolf hunt even be allowed to happen?
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service gave back to the state of Wisconsin management of the wolves. The head of the DNR of state of Wisconsin said that they would properly manage the wolves. Immediately thereafter, there was a legislative movement to open up wolf hunting.
I think things changed because the new people came into the legislature and they were beholden to different interests. One of the groups they were beholden to was the Wisconsin hunters. And it's a small group, but it has a disproportionately large effect on people because they're very active and they do a lot of lobbying and they're very loud and vocal. The resolution to support the wolf hunt happened in Douglas County, and the first step was that a woman who was, I believe, trains dogs for hunting came to the Forestry Committee and gave them a big spiel and presented them with a sample resolution and asked them to bring this to the county board. On our Forestry Committee, there's one person in particular who's a very vocal wolf hater, and he was I think he's the chair of the committee, and he basically kind of talked everybody else into it. I think there were a couple votes against it, 1 or 2, but basically it went pretty much unchallenged onto the county board, where it was brought up, and people debated it and used such scientific facts such as, you know, when my grandchildren go outside, I see wolves across the field looking at them hungrily. There was no scientific basis for any of the decisions that were made there that night. And it was basically about fear and fear-mongering and fairy tales. There was only 1 vote against it on the board, and so basically it passed pretty much unanimously.
The wolf hunt was cooked up by Bob Welch, who's a big Republican lobbyist contributor. And as nearly as I can tell, he did it for the bear hunters, the people who run hounds. I think some of the Democrats from up north were worried about the hunters and the hunter rights organizations, which is a front group funded by probably Koch money and other right-wing, corporate money coming after them. So they were afraid of the special interests.
Just the way it happened was a total surprise. I didn't expect on the day that wolves were delisted that the legislature would begin legislation to designate the wolf a game animal and institute a wolf hunting season without talking to the wolf biologist first. It was very clearly orchestrated by the legislature, and DNR went along with it. And that was what was so frustrating about it. We always trusted that the DNR would make their decisions using science. And in this case here, they totally not only disregarded science, they disregarded public input. There is a blind faith that because people work for the DNR, they are going to use sound science and make management decisions regarding the wolf based on the best available data. What they don't realize, it's a top-down process. We have a governor who appoints the director of the DNR. The director of the DNR appoints the people on the Natural Resource Board. So they're all political appointees making these decisions. Supposedly, they are supposed to consult with biologists, but they don't have to follow the biologist's recommendation. And then what I have seen, if the biologists want to keep their job, they will do what their bosses tell them.
My name is Peter David. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. I've served in that capacity for a little more than 25 years. I think a lot of us were surprised with the way the wolf hunt came to be. Not so shocking perhaps that there is a hunt, but that it was done with so little review, so little input from the public, and so little involvement of the Department of Natural Resources' own professional staff. This clearly was a political maneuvering, and I think the science behind it was pretty limited, and most of the decision making in it was a done deal by the time it became public.
Most of the DNR staff have been trained as scientists, but they don't get to behave as scientists, unfortunately. In a bureaucracy like the DNR, people are hired and fired on the basis of whether they follow orders, whether they follow what's the expected party line. If the director of the DNR says, this is the way it's going to be, all the other people have to say, this is the way it's going to be. And so they're not using science really. Going through the motions of science, but the conclusions are very influenced by the expectations of their superior. They've trained to be scientists. They know about science and how science is all about finding out the truth, and here they are now working a place where they're not supposed to find out the truth. They're supposed to be able to say the things that the bosses want them to say,
And Kathy Stepp is totally disqualified to be head of the Department of Natural Resources. She should be head of Commerce or WEDC if she's going to be in government at all. I compared putting her in charge of the DNR as like putting Lindsay Lohan in charge of a rehab facility. And no offense to Lindsay Lohan, but you know, Kathy Stepp was a developer builder. She had no administrative experience, and it shows. I mean, basically the organization is for polluters by polluters and contributors to Scott Walker. Right, one of the key hallmarks of Wisconsin is called the Wisconsin Idea, and that's where you use the UW system and its great experts to help solve Wisconsin's problems. And these people, these UW scientists, were consulting with the DNR on this issue, and DNR basically fired them and then put up this hand-picked committee of interest groups that's stacked for wolf killing. I have former employees who are working there, and it's a very difficult environment. They don't feel valued, and they're worried about losing their jobs for basically doing their job.
The DNR then christened the Wolf Advisory Committee, a group charged with coming up with a wolf management plan for the state, including how to implement the hunt, quotas for wolf kills, and how to educate the public about all of this. As the months wore on, they systematically removed anyone who was sympathetic toward the wolf from their ranks and replaced them with special interest groups intent on killing. All that was left for them to disagree on was how to kill.
So 7 hours, we can come up with 4 options. 4 options. 0 to 350. 1 option, population goal rate within 10%. 351 to 500, population goal rate within 10%. 501 to 750, population goal rate within 10%. 751 or more, population goal rate within 10%. I mean, is this really this dysfunctional?
So I have been attending the Wolf Advisory Committee meetings since their inception. And what's different about this committee as opposed to prior committees is that the special interest groups that serve on this committee are markedly anti-wolf. They have said things in these meetings such as the head of the Wisconsin Trappers Association saying that wolves fill no ecological role.
The ecosystem is not managed by wolves. They don't have an ecological value in our Northwoods.
And I didn't even really feel that that was debatable in the year 2014. We've heard things about that how fun it is to gut shoot a wolf, and by that means shooting a wolf in the abdomen so that it bleeds out internally and suffers longer, and how fun that would be. You know, Bob Welch, one of the key lobbyists, I remember in a specific meeting said, "Wolves are gonna die. Who cares how they die?" in referring to using dogs versus wolves. So a real disrespect for not only wolves, the obvious, but a disrespect for the scientists who have dedicated their whole career to studying wolves. They felt that at the time that social science was not necessary. Apparently, you know, Safari Club International, who is a trophy hunting lobby, was more important than someone with a PhD in sociology or in ecology.
We had a state law now that said you now will implement a wolf hunt, and in order to move that practice forward, we had to have people who were a part of the group that were willing to be partners in that effort, if you will. And we had a lot of time in Wisconsin where we had the former group, which several folks have talked about today, where they were a party of. But when we're charged to manage and to implement a hunt, coming in and telling us don't hunt wolves is not a productive way to run a committee, frankly. That's just a candid way to lay it out. So we had to have people who were willing to work with us in partnership and be willing to help us and advise us along the way in implementing state law.
When I went to the Wolf Advisory Committee meeting, I found it to be rather divisive, standoffish, and I didn't feel very welcome. I was there with my Menominee mother and she wasn't afforded very much respect either. And I also noticed that the people that were there to stand up and speak on behalf of the wolves or anything pro-wolf were not afforded very much respect.
I found the Wolf Advisory Committee meetings very interesting. For the most part, I found that there really wasn't any representation there or any advocacy on the board itself for our relatives. Of course, we know they couldn't be there to speak, and we know that they were not invited. So it was a shame that at least one of the members didn't try to speak up for them, but it seems to be pretty much out of balance. It favors the hunters, the people that like to kill the wolves. For the most part, they seem to be very deaf to what we were saying when we were testifying on behalf of our wolf relatives.
Oh, well, when you go to the Wolf Advisory Committee, you realize you have no voice. It's run by wolf haters and uneducated, no science behind them. It's a complete joke. Okay. And it's frustrating because you can't say anything. And if you even try to interject, they warn you you're going to be thrown out.
There was no collaboration and there was no diversity. And I saw that even the way the room was set up. One side of the room was one group. In that case, it was all of the extreme hunting groups. And then the other side was the DNR. And there was nobody else. That was it. No diversity at all. Of all the things that the hunting groups learned all throughout those 13, 14, 15 months, none of that went into the end result of that management plan. They could have gone in the first week and just decided what they wanted to kill and where they wanted to kill it, and it would be over with. And that seemed like it was their intention all the time, and it was always this, it was always them pushing and wanting to, the sense that they wanted to kill more and they wanted to have more options for killing and they wanted to find more places to kill. And there was nothing about protecting the wolf at all. The last meeting in October of 2014, they talked about education and the educational component that needed to go into the management plan, and who would be part of that. And one of the members of the group said that the wolf is getting too much attention. They wanted 2 statewide recognized wolf education groups in the being part of the management plan, the new one, because they are part of the tracking and monitoring program during recovery, and they are in there now, and they, the hunting groups didn't think that that was not appropriate for these educational groups to be in there either. There was no creative thought that went into that. So to be quite honest, I don't know how they plan to educate the public about wolves. The thing that they spent the shortest amount of time in throughout the 14, 15 months that they had the committee probably was on the educational component. I would leave those meetings, and it took me 4 to 5 days to get over those meetings. There was so much venom and hatred, and I didn't understand where it came from.
I serve now on the Wolf Advisory Committee, previously served on the Wolf Science Committee, and also was involved on the Wolf Roundtable. And have been working in that way for a couple of decades now in some capacity, trying to represent some of the tribe's interests in Miyinkin or the wolf. I think there's been some really major fundamental kind of changes that I'm concerned about. At one time we had the Science Committee, which was made up primarily of biologists, and then we had a roundtable committee, our stakeholder group. And those 2 groups were separated from each other. So you had discussions that were really based on biology. Now, sometimes those were affected by the social concerns or the other concerns brought in from the stakeholders. but it was sort of a two-part process, and it made it, I think, much more clear what was science and what was social or political. Now we've had a disbanding of the Science Committee and the Wolf Advisory Committee, which was assembled, at the Secretary's direction, who could serve on that. There's concerns, I think, one, about just the makeup of that committee, that it doesn't reflect the Wisconsin public very well. And then there's this whole fact that there's this blending of the process, that there's no sort of clear separation between the science and other non-scientific concerns. And so what comes out of that committee now is already sort of an amalgamation of different concerns. And I think when those things were separated, it was really better for the science, and it was better for the management of the species to know where certain decision-making was being based. It's certainly not the way the tribes are interested in seeing wolves managed. And it seems to be done primarily from a perspective where the wolf is still a vilified creature. And it's not based on any recognition of the ecological or the cultural values that wolves have to very many people. And there's all sorts of things I think you can see between the population goal and the way the hunt is designed that support. That I don't think is really even an arguable contention. There's a whole lot more science that could be brought into this, starting with setting the population goal in a whole different manner than it's been done in the past.
One of the Wolf Advisory Committee's first priorities was to determine how many wolves we should have in Wisconsin. Through a process which can only be described as dubious, they arrived at the number 350.
I believe that wolves should be reclassified as an endangered species because the threats that caused the wolf to become endangered still exist today. We've had almost 500 wolves killed in the last 3 years, and I have yet to see any science to support this. What they are doing is they are allowing the wolves their populations to decline to such a level just to prevent them from becoming endangered again. And I was part of many of the discussions when we came up with that number. That number was a compromise. Where it was done back in 1999, everyone sitting around a table, input from the public, and everyone was talking about how many wolves can Wisconsin sustain. And there were many who wanted more than 500, many who wanted less than 350. And so 350 came about as a compromise, and it was never intended to be a cap. The way that 350 number was meant to be, or the intent of it was to be, at least during the discussions, was here's 350 wolves. When we reach that number, we're going to be doing more aggressive management.
350 wolves was a good goal when we had 200 wolves in the state. And we're fortunate, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we've come a long ways. But it's clear that Wisconsin is capable ecologically of supporting a substantially larger number of wolves. From the tribe's perspective, there's a lot of benefits that we accrue from wolves, but you get those benefits essentially sort of in proportion to the population of wolves that you have on the landscape. And so a population of 350 wolves isn't nearly as good as a population of 700 or 1,000. We know we don't really have to worry about capping wolves. It's not like some species where there's really a need to harvest them. Wolves are very good at taking care of their own numbers, and there's never going to be a terribly high number of wolves in Wisconsin. So we don't need to cap them from that perspective. But to get the ecological benefits of wolves, they can show us what their carrying capacity is here on the landscape. And I think from the tribe's perspective, wolves should be allowed to live wherever they're capable of doing that, and they're not causing excessive problems for people.
Where we need to get the state of Wisconsin centered is where the wolves should be. Right now they're trying to come up out of the air amongst a bunch of disenfranchised groups that can't agree. How many wolves should we have in the state? All of that is irrelevant if you haven't decided where you want the wolves to be and how you want the wolves to be protected. Well, this is a wonderful area of Wisconsin right here with very few people, very little influence by private land ownership. It's a wonderful area to have a wolf pack, but it is an area that is intensively hunted. And because of that, it's going to be the first area where the wolf pack is eliminated, and at the same time, it is the area that you most want the wolf packs to be. Myself, I favor as much as possible keeping the wolf packs genetically pure and free of dog genes from their DNA as possible. We are able at this point to protect our wolf from being affected by coyotes and from being affected by domestic dog by protecting the wolves in areas that are large public lands where they'll be left alone. And these areas are fairly easily identified, and once they're identified, then you can figure out how many wolves will you tolerate in this area. And I say tolerate because their own population is limiting. When they have too many wolves, they know what to do, they run. And they will disperse and find new areas to be.
With the administration being the way they are, they've come to the conclusion they want to lower the number to 350. We want to have these aggressive hunts. It's not sustainable. Just biologically, with the way a wolf reproduces. They reproduce once a year, have pups, 4 to 5 pups to a pack, and a very high mortality rate. So the way these outright slaughters are going along, it's not going to be before long, and we're going to have some major problems with the disruption of the pack dynamics. And we need to have areas where wolves can be wolves without being harassed. There should be no hunting, no trapping, no hunting with dogs, no training of dogs to hunt wolves in areas of prime habitat like the Chequamegon National Forest, Nicolet National Forest. In my opinion, the wolf population is not growing out of control. It was stabilizing, it was showing signs of stabilization, and all research indicates that as prime habitat becomes occupied, the wolf population stabilizes. That's what's happened in Minnesota, that's what's happened in Michigan, and that's what's happening in Wisconsin without the use of a hunt. And now that we have had 3 years of hunting now, that population is going to really go down.
There has been recent, within the last year, research to suggest that wolves are, because they're territorial, there's a lot of managing their own numbers within themselves.
How many do we need? It depends on a whole lot of things. You know, it depends on the health of the wolves. It depends on the health of the deer. It depends on more sophisticated behavioral management methods we can use to make the relationship between deer and wolves and humans a satisfactory one. One of the things you have to worry about with any animal species is you have to worry about inbreeding. It's very important that within a pack of wolves, some of them leave and go breed with another pack. Some of the females leave, some of the males leave. Those that stay are ones that David Meach called the biters, because they bide their time. They stay with the pack until they get a chance to mate. The others are dispersers, you know, both males and females, who decide I can do better elsewhere, and they leave. And that process is very, very important, because that causes the genetic mix so that so we don't get inbreeding. Inbreeding can result in susceptibility to sarcoptic mange, among other things, and lots of other illnesses. So that's very important. And those dispersers, they have to find another wolf pack, you know, and wolf packs are not easy to find, and they're not, and the wolves they find don't necessarily tolerate them joining the pack. So there needs to be enough of a population so that the animals can disperse from pack to pack and mix their genes.
The consensus among the experts seems to be that more wolves are better. But what about the general public?
So the DNR put out a wolf tolerance survey, And it's not being well publicized because it was made up by the Wolf Advisory Committee, and is actually, I think they were even slanting it to try and get the answers they wanted. But actually, the majority of people that they sent the surveys to lived in wolf country, and even still, the majority of people want the wolf number at where it is or higher.
So when the survey came out and they found that 53% wanted wolves up there where they are at now, or even a larger population, they did not like that. They did not like that at all. They dismissed it at the Wolf Advisory Committee meeting. They didn't like what they heard. It was real clear. They were real uncomfortable when the results were being presented. I was there too. Everybody's anxious to hear this. We really wanted to hear. And so they were real uncomfortable. They didn't like what they heard. So, and I do feel like there's more than even 53%. What I do know is that a good percentage of respondents that returned the survey were hunters. Hunters only represent 11 to 12%, 11.5% of the population. That's based on the selling of tags. I believe there are a lot more people in this state that want wolves, a lot more than even that survey. But we got to go with the survey. So that's what it said, and there's a majority on there. And so that was real confirming for me too.
Most of the respondents, about 8 to 1, were in wolf range versus not wolf range. And what we found was that most people want the current number of wolves we have or more. I think as a sociologist, this really should speak to policy. Because in the state of Wisconsin, we don't have a wolf problem. We just don't have a wolf problem. We have a people problem, but we don't have a wolf problem. So, you know, only we can successfully coexist with the wolf, and they depend on us. We did see that almost 50% of the respondents were hunters, so we know even hunters are tolerant of wolves. This is our government, and our government should be following the public opinion and not discounting what all of us believe, and even their own social survey, that we want wolves. So this DNR administration is absolutely beholden to special interest groups that don't want to see education come first. They don't want to see science come first. They certainly don't want to see wolves come first. And I think that, or my gosh, public input.
The survey clearly shows that a majority of people want wolves, even those within wolf range. It's also worth noting that, aside from the 53% of residents who want the wolf population maintained or increased, a further 14% counted themselves as unsure. Only 15% of residents want to see the wolves eliminated.
One important part in that social survey is they talk about that most people favored a wolf hunt. Well, that's not exactly how that question went. What they asked is, do they support a sustainable wolf hunt? And that could be something as just removing the animals that are already problems. But a generalized hunt does not address problem wolves. It's like lining up 600 citizens, 20 are criminals, shooting into the crowd and hoping you hit one. We have wolves deep within, we visited Chequamegon National Forest, Nicolet National Forest, thousands of acres of county forest right where we want wolves, and yet it seemed to be those were the areas being most heavily hunted. How wolves are, what the DNR yet likes to use as harvested, which I refuse because they're not an ear of corn, they're a sentient being, is by trapping. And Friends of the Wisconsin Wolf, certainly myself, have taken a position on trapping. When I talk to hunters and people that are in favor of wolf hunting, I often ask them what they do when they step on their Labrador's tail, and they say they apologize to their dog. But yet a wolf can languish in a trap for upwards of 48 hours, or in a snare around their neck, choking and suffocating and frothing and vomiting and crying out in pain for their family members, like your dog would. We've taken a pretty firm position that we don't believe trapping of wolves is humane. And people need to know that these wolves are not being killed by some fair chase. They're being trapped, terrified, open to the elements, with their pack mates watching them suffer.
Good shot.
One thing the general public should know about the wolf hunt season is that most of the animals, the majority of the animals, upwards 70–80%, are wolves under a year old. So essentially this is a wolf puppy hunting season.
I don't think the hunt is sustainable at all. I'm very concerned that they're killing so many of the young pups. Estimates are from 60 to 75%, and this is the next generation. And they have normally a fairly high mortality rate as it is. So when you kill pups plus added to the mortality rate, you're really wiping out the pack from the bottom up.
One of the reasons the state gives for needing a wolf hunt is to address livestock depredation. Well, in the last year, only had 13 verified wolf depredations. One thing to know is that all missing calves are also added to wolf depredation, whether they were taken by coyotes or not. So a lot of those numbers have been inflated, especially since this administration has taken hold. Wolf depredation since the hunt has fallen. But one thing to keep in mind is that the other lethal controls didn't go away. So we're still addressing problem wolves, and we have a wolf hunt. So if a wolf hunt was really addressing depredation of livestock, then we wouldn't need to have the USDA and the DNR going in and removing problem wolves concurrently with a hunt. So I think it's important for people to know that this recreational and trophy hunt doesn't address depredation at all.
I do not believe we need to use wolf hunting as a tool to control depredation. When there's a depredation, we need to be thorough, we need to be precise, and we need to get the offending animals. We have the tools available for that. The farmer, the producer who's had the loss, has the authority for lethal control. We have DNR lethal control. If there's an area where there is a farm that's having a problem, we can support removing the animals around that farm, but a general recreational hunt is not needed.
Absolutely not. The depredation is a real issue for certain people. If you're experiencing depredations, I think you've got a right to seek some source of dealing with that problem. But a hunt is an incredibly inefficient way of doing that. The timing of it is wrong. If you're having a problem in the spring losing calves, having a hunt 6 months later doesn't really help you very much. We know that roughly 80 to 90% of the wolves that are harvested in any year haven't been involved in packs that are causing depredation. So it's sort of like it's like dealing with a speeding problem on the highway by pulling random cars over. Yeah, some of them were speeders, but all in all, it's just not a very effective way of dealing with the problem. So if you're having a problem, you got to deal with it quickly. You have to target the animals that are causing you the problem, and a hunt just doesn't do that. And there's really almost nothing built into this hunt to try to target animals that are causing problems.
I worry about a collapse in the population. I have a master's in natural science and zoology. I've studied wildlife management and large predators like wolves and bears, and it's like the problem is when you indiscriminately kill wolves from the pack, if you take out enough alphas, you destabilize the pack. You get more depredation, more killing of livestock, and then that leads to basically chaos.
I'm not a fan of hunting predators in order to control depredation. I believe that there is a balance that the animals themselves will naturally monitor. I live in Trade Lake, Wisconsin, about 11 miles southeast of Grantsburg, Wisconsin, and I'm a cheesemaker along with my husband David. We run sheep, cattle, and goats. The only way we could possibly farm in this area is with the use of our livestock guardian dogs. If we didn't have them, we would have nothing, because our sheep are basically like a walking buffet. We have 200 acres, and half of that is dedicated as a wildlife refuge. And when the wildlife come through, so do the predators following the wildlife. So we have constant traffic coming through the farm. We have had wolves on occasion on the farm. We've seen them. They're pretty unique. They trot through with not a care in the world. They're pretty cavalier. And that's why we also run the number of dogs we do, because wolves don't hunt alone, and it's not fair to ask a dog to protect the livestock alone. So we run anywhere from 8 to 10 guardian dogs. Our guard dogs keep back, they speak the language of the predators, and they keep back the initial predators, and believe it or not, the predators then, they're very territorial also, that's coyotes and wolves, and they'll keep away other predators. So it becomes like ripples on a pond. And when you start to take out those ripples, other ripples move in, and they may or may not be predators that are sustainable to your area. We had a coyote pack that was here for over 12 years that we never had problems with. They hunted mice, rabbits, whatever. They stayed away from our livestock. They respected our dogs, and they kept other coyotes away. And some hunters came through on property adjacent to us and took out the main alpha bitch. And within 2 weeks, a neighbor 2 miles down the road lost 10 sheep. We had our first coyote attack because we weren't expecting it. We only had some juvenile dogs in the back field with the sheep. And it took us bringing all of our dogs out in order to keep that coyote pack back. There were 10 coyotes in that pack. But it was like juveniles with no guidance. They were just running amok. And so there is a balance. There's a whole hierarchy in the predators. So if you work with it, you know, it can work with you. I am not against taking out a predator that will not work with the situation. You do get those that run amok on their own, and that can be problematic. Everybody I know, anybody I know that has suffered depredation, have they tried guardian dogs? Have they tried alternative measures? Is this really about helping livestock production, or is this about making more money for the state through selling hunter licenses? You know, we hunt, we put food in our freezer. We just don't believe in trophy hunting. I don't believe in allowing rogue predators to go unchecked. But I think that there needs to be a lot of education. I just would like to see people try alternatives.
At one time, the DNR, the Wisconsin DNR, spent a lot of time and effort in educating the public about wolves. Now it's very rare that you see any factual information being put out for the public as to how to coexist with wolves. So you see situations where bear, we live in bear country. Bears raid bird feeders all the time. We see reports saying, do not take down your bear feeders because bears are coming in. We never see any such thing like that with wolves. Wolves come into town because they're following deer, but the DNR is not putting out releases saying, hey, stop feeding your deer near a residential area. You're going to bring in a predator. They're not doing anything to counter the misinformation that wolves are eating all the deer, or explaining how the coexistence of deer and wolves, what happens in the woods. If you want to get a deer, think like a wolf. Deer are going to spook and they're going to leave. They're going to be in areas where they could see, smell, and hear predators coming. DNR has failed miserably in that area. They just are not putting out the information, and so instead they are pandering to the fear factor.
I think in every state there's always recognition of how great the need is to do education, and yet it's always sort of the last thing that actually gets accomplished. There's probably almost no species on the Wisconsin landscape that has, you know, is more poorly understood or has more half-truths or falsehoods said about it, and that people just are taught really everything but the truth about wolves in many situations. So there's a great need, and truthfully, very little work is really designed to do that. And people have to be receptive to it too, and some people are and some people aren't.
I decided to start up an informational source, Wildlife Public Trust and Coexistence, because I saw a need for a kind of a general clearinghouse, and wanted to start an exchange of information. And the heart of all of this, and I don't think the public knows about this, is that there is this phrase called public trust, and it's a legal binding document that holds up in a court of law, and that it states that everything out there belongs to every one of us. And just because you carry a gun and pay $8 to trap infinite amount of animals doesn't mean that that's yours. That animal that they trap belongs to me too. That they kill belongs to me too. And So for me, it's really, the public trust is something that is information that I try and get out there. Who owns the wildlife? All of us own the wildlife. Once I think people learn that they do have a vested interest in it, that this is theirs and that they can have a say, that they will start to participate more. Everyone should learn about wild animals. If you live out in the rural area, as I do, you have to accept the wild animals out there. We moved out here. This was their space. I have such a hard time with people living in the rural area saying that they're afraid of animals and that people don't understand what it's like to live in the rural area. No, if you're afraid of animals, then move back to the city.
Anybody who really hates wolves doesn't like them more now that they're hunted. And for people who are on the fence, I think continuing to sort of reinforce this idea that wolves are a problem before they're anything else increases intolerance of wolves. And I think really in this hunt, wolves still are being targeted as a negative species. And that's the way really the state is portraying them. And that in itself is sort of an education that is happening. People are learning that that's the way the state views wolves, that they are a negative species. And it's till the state, I think, takes some leadership and starts treating them as a positive species, it doesn't increase tolerance for wolves. You know, the big thing I think that the tribes would say is that it certainly is not at all impossible to coexist with wolves. They did it. They did it for thousands of years. You know, the tribes talk about wolves as their brother. And some people look at that as being sort of an extreme position. But I've argued that they're not putting wolves on a pedestal. They're not crushing wolves under their heel. They're side by side. And, you know, I grew up with a brother. We fought sometimes. We had some problems. In the end, I'm sure glad I had multiple brothers.
The wolf is a brother to Anishinaabe. Mohegan is brother to Anishinaabe. And it plays a very important role in our spirituality. And they began to travel the earth together, visiting many different places. They became inseparable companions and eventually blood brothers. When human beings today encroach on the wolf's territory, Mohegan, the wolf, retires further and further into the wilderness. And then it was prophesied that maybe someday that Mohegan may no longer have a place to retreat if there's no wilderness. If that happens, if Mohegan passes out of existence, Anishinaabe, you'll soon follow. You'll die of great loneliness of spirit. And so the fate of Anishinaabe is related to the fate of Mohegan. And so their destiny is said to be the same. If Anishinaabe, if you pass out of existence, all other human beings will soon follow. And that's the wolf now is a very strong symbol of the wilderness, of what little wilderness that we have left. And so the wolf is a threat to any of those who would seek to exploit that wilderness and those resources. So that's motivated by greed and selfishness. And it's those sort of people that hate the wolf. See, Anishinaabe, it's our brother. And so we've taken a very serious stand against wolf hunting here in Wisconsin, as well as Minnesota and Michigan. Because of our relationship to the wolf, the common destiny, the common fate, not only of Anishinaabe people, but of everybody.
The wolf hunt definitely is actually it's a holocaust of an entire species, just like the holocaust of our people and the holocaust of a number of other species. And to think that we would go out and kill something on purpose for no reason. There's no reason to kill wolves, none whatsoever. Wolves are a part of our life, just like bears and deer and everything else. And every one of them, you know, could be feared in their own way. But we don't fear wolves any more than we would fear a bear or, say, a cougar or anything. You know, you respect it and you give it its space.
That's what all of this really comes down to: fear. The unfounded fears of the uninformed are what is dictating the actions of this administration and the DNR that it took control of. Instead of combating wolves, what we really need to fight is fear. Unfortunately, what we are seeing happen from our DNR and our government is the exact opposite, eliminating the wolves and nurturing the fear.
I think this fear comes from childhood stories, things like Little Red Riding Hood or The Big Bad Wolf, and that puts an emotional sense of fear in the children, as well as you know, a cognitive understanding that the wolves might be dangerous. As they mature, the cognitive understanding changes to something more rational, but the emotions of fear, they don't change as quickly. And in our own work with wolves, particularly when I've got doing it with the middle school kids, when I give talks about this, always somebody asks, what kind of weapons do you carry to protect yourself from the wolves? You know, we don't carry anything. There isn't any need for that, I don't think. The only protection we carry is we have a little compressed air boat horn. You know what I'm talking about? It's a little jar of compressed air with a horn on top. You press it, it goes beep, very loud. And we carry one of those along. We've never had to use it, but we have one of those along just in case a wolf would get a little too close. And I'm sure if we blasted them with that, they'd be gone in a second. I think the way that you handle fear is empathy, understanding and appreciating and validating their fear, and then education, helping them to understand that the wolves are not to be feared.
That belief that the wolves are going to harm your grandchildren, that's Little Red Riding Hood tale, and that is not a documentary, it's a fable. I mean, what was it? One person was killed by a wolf in North America, all of North America in the last 100 years. Once I was skiing not far from here at the After Hour Trail, and I was the only one there. It was a beautiful, we had just gotten like a foot of snow. The trails were not groomed, blue sky, and I was coming down the ski path, and around the corner, and I had stopped to drink some water, and coming down the path was this big, black, beautiful wolf. Awesome. It was like a magical moment, and he saw us and he took off through the woods. And it was a fleeting moment, but it was really magical, actually. And I told people about that, and the first thing most people said, weren't you afraid? Fear never was ever a concern. Why would I be afraid? They're afraid of us. They're elusive animals. They don't want to be seen or bothered by humans. So no, and I ride my horse in the woods, I hike in the woods alone, and if I'm ever lucky enough to see a wolf, to me it's a treat, it's a gift. It's not anything to be afraid of. They would never bother you.
I think the media sensationalizes things because it sells papers and it builds into that fear. And when I talk to children or kids, everyone has seen the movie The Grey or The Werewolf, and they've seen this, and this is something that just is constantly reinforced through the media, and people are afraid. They see a wolf and they're thinking, What's it going to do? Oh, gee, that wolf didn't snarl at me. And when I've had people say that to me, they'll say, I saw a wolf and it just stared at me. And I ask them, like, yeah, and what? And that's what they expected to be snarling, growling, howling at them. And when I explain to them basic wolf biology, that that's how a wolf acts towards another wolf, they go, oh, I didn't know that.
I think the media has really trumpeted this wolf hunt. It's news for them, and they've showed pictures, and they've showed, you know, we had a newspaper in our area that had a photo of a father and his son with a very young wolf that they had first trapped and then shot in the head. And they were holding the wolf between them. It looked like a large puppy. And, you know, and the article said that the son relayed that how exciting it was to do such a bonding activity with his father, and he would always remember it. They didn't ever look at the side of what it was like for the animals. They always looked at it as a great new wildlife outdoors experience for people. So I think they definitely played a big role in making people feel it was okay, and then also, in some sense, even glamorizing it. I don't think the media was interested in hearing from people who advocate for wolves. I was part of an action, and we tried to get people to come and to talk with them. And I actually spoke about a lot of things that I've talked about on this film. And they picked a clip that was very, very small and minor and didn't really have much to do with the issue at all. And it just wasn't, they weren't interested in that. The media was interested in promoting this from the beginning.
And it's not just the mass media either. Much of the worst of it has bypassed traditional television and print news and found its home on social media sites like Facebook and YouTube. The Wisconsin Wolf Hunting Facebook page currently boasts over 33,000 likes and is filled with hunters spreading sentiments such as, if we can't kill some of them, we will kill all of them. Smoke a pack a day. And the ever-popular mantra, shoot, shovel, and shut up, referring to poaching more wolves than are legally allowed.
The videos that I've seen or I witnessed on social media were very disheartening, disgusting, dehumanizing. I don't even have words to describe how they really made me feel, because as a hunter, as a Ho-Chunk caretaker of this land, it's abhorrent. It's appalling. There is absolutely no reason to be having one brother kill or fight their brother like that, because that's what they are. They're our brothers, like the dogs, the wolves. They're our family. They're a part of this circle. They're a part of our lives. Without them, we can't exist. And then just to see the enjoyment that these people got from watching this gore and horror. I don't have words for it. Even in Ho-Chunk, we don't have words for it.
They're pretty embarrassing and disgusting as a hunter to see. And people are taking photos, you know, and they're smiling and kind of posing next to them like they're really proud of it, and they're about to dispatch the animal. They're not about to release it back into the wild. Now these are photos of someone who's proud to kill a wonderful animal like a wolf. As a hunter myself, I hunt animals who I intend on eating. I hunt the animals for the meat that they provide me and my family. And I don't know a single person that's ever had any bite of wolf meat. Maybe they feed it to their hounds, you know, something really degrading like that. But these hunters that I see, they're not really true hunters. It's just kind of been sport hunting, or you know what hunters would call, deer hunters would call, like trophy hunting. You're just kind of looking for something to brag about to your friends.
All of this media is disseminated around the world. Everyone knows what we are doing here in Wisconsin, and everyone has an opinion on it. Few of those opinions are favorable.
I do think wolf hunting hurts the Wisconsin economy. I've run into people as I've traveled that said, one person said to me, "Your state is barbaric," which was pretty shocking to hear, even though I'm sure in some ways many people would agree with that. But I also know that some people haven't come to this state because of that. We were down south, we ran into people and they said Wisconsin was on their list of do not travel to states because of the wolf killing.
I went out to Yellowstone National Park this summer, and I would not step a foot into Idaho. They are killing machine there, and they are killing off all their wolves. And I know that Wisconsin is gaining a reputation. I have family in Minnesota, and we are just frowned upon here as a bunch of beer-drinking thugs that carry around guns and go out and kill animals. And it is becoming a state with a real bad reputation, I feel. And so I think that hurts us here. I know Illinois, we're gaining a reputation down there too. And so I think that hurts our economy. I've known of people that head up north Michigan, and they will not stop in Wisconsin now. I think the rural area could really bring in dollars if they would really, if we would use our resources to build the economy. For example, in Wildlife Public Trust and Coexistence, the website that I have conversed with people around the country, and there was a photographer, an amateur photographer, a husband and wife, and she got in touch with me, and she said, I said something about coming to Wisconsin for wolves. She said, you know, we just went down south, and my husband and I spent, for 4 days, we spent $12,000 photographing. She said, if we could spend that much money up north and get pictures of wolves, we'd be there. Or just, you know, cater to tourists. She said, she felt Wisconsin is really missing an opportunity.
All this damage that has been done to our beautiful state, the economy, the ecosystem, our reputation within our nation and our world. Though it is our friend, our brother, the wolf, that has taken the heaviest toll from all of this, with 1,000 animals legally taken over 3 hunting seasons and another estimated 200 lost to poaching per year. We are all paying the price for the ignorance and fear that is running rampant. We need to put a stop to the Wisconsin wolf hunt permanently. In December of 2014, after we had filmed these interviews but before completing this documentary, the gray wolf was officially relisted as a protected species. This was a great victory, but unfortunately there is still time for that decision to be appealed. Wyoming has already filed one. So what's the best thing for you to do right now? We ask that you please donate to the Friends of the Wisconsin Wolf. Every donation helps ensure that we will be able to keep up the fight to save the gray wolf. And please, write a letter to U.S. Secretary of the Interior Sally Jewell. Secretary Jewell's decision on the future of wolf management could come any day now, and it's important for us wolf advocates to keep the pressure on. Please include any of the information presented in this documentary that you see fit, but it's the most important to remind the Secretary that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is required to base all wildlife management policies on the best available science, and that delisting was based on insufficient research. States where the wolves have been delisted have not managed their wolves like other wildlife. They have instead opted to aggressively hunt wolves as far as they possibly can, and the gray wolf has barely begun to recover in, or is still completely absent from, large areas of suitable habitat, which are necessary for the long-term survival of the species. Wolves are more important to us and to the environment as a whole than most people have ever imagined. Please join us in taking action to preserve these magnificent creatures.
You know, I'm glad that my kids are going to grow up in Wisconsin where wolves are present. And if you're going to take a wolf's life, I think it needs to be done for better reasons than are commonly given right now. Most people are taking wolves because they don't like wolves. Not because they value that animal or think that there's some value in that experience, but that they don't like wolves. You know, we don't have to live with outdated and archaic views of this animal anymore. We know more than we did 100 years ago. We'll know more 100 years from now, but it just makes sense in the meantime to let them fulfill their role on the landscape that we know is real and is important.
Actually, what brought me to northern Wisconsin was the wolves. I had studied dogs at that time for about 30 years. I think they're beautiful animals and really animals to be admired, and I feel it's been a privilege for me to understand them.
I don't believe there should be a wolf hunt. I think that the number of wolves we had in Wisconsin was not a threat to anyone, and I don't think just because some people want to kill a different species is an adequate reason for having a wolf hunt.
Wolves are important to me for a number of reasons. One is I like studying interspecies communication, and all of the dogs are emotionally able to communicate with people. We know when a dog's wagging its tail that the dog is happy. We know by the vocalizations that the dog makes, whether or not it's happy, anxious, whatever emotion it is, we understand that. So for me, studying wolves and enjoying wolves, I can hear a wolf pack howl on its own in the night, and after listening to them for the number of years, I know exactly what they feel and what position they are in. And I think most people would that listen to the same audio that I do, that they're able to understand what is being conveyed. But what you feel and what an individual feels when they hear a wolf pack howl is dramatically different. Some people feel anger, some people feel fear, some people feel awe. And for me, a practicing Christian, yes, the wolf is still a sacred animal to me. And it always will be.